Righto, tally-o there champs, and here it is, the epic showdown between the next generation PC with RTX 3080 in it and 10900K versus the 2020 iMac with pretty much the same Intel 10th generation 10-core CPU and a Radeon Pro 5700 XT with 16GB of RAM versus 10GB of RAM on the RTX 3080. So this is pretty much like for like as I can go. Now ignore the Dell Tower there, that's not what I used. I did use the Tele-O-Tech Cable Management Pro over here. That's what I used to sort of test my stuff in. It has an MSI Mag with Z490 Tomahawk motherboard. It's actually a really good motherboard, 2.5 gig networking. You can overclock to 5 gigahertz easily, even though I run in stock, because I want to compare these things fairly, let them both be stock. Now the GPU I used in this is the Asus TUF RTX 3080. I do have the 3090, stay tuned for videos on that, and I do have another special one coming that I cannot talk about. It's not an AMD, it's another graphics card, and we're going to do some more tests with that one. But this is the RTX 3080, and the Asus TUF RX 3080 and 3090 is probably better than most of the high-end solutions from the other third parties. I mean, this thing has dual BIOS, awesome cooling, it's quiet, and it has two HDMI 2.1s. Some of the other high-end ones don't even have that. And I actually did test with the 3090 as well, but all these scores are from the 3080. So I wanted to see 10th generation CPUs, the best graphics card you can get on both these systems. I know you can get a 3090, but we're sticking with the 3080. And which one do you think's faster for content creation? Now, when it comes to gaming, don't even make me laugh. The iMac will absolutely get destroyed. Like, it's not even a competition. It's not even close. Just forget about it. Just for gaming, just get the PC. Now, you'll be amazed with the price. Here, have a look at this price. Now, this is like for like. Now, you got to add about $300 to the iMac because that's with the 8 gigs there. If you put it up to 64 gigs like I've got this PC spec'd up, it is still cheaper than the PC. And you might think, well, how's that possible? Yeah, it's got RTX 3080. Even though there it does say 2080, I just put $700 because obviously you can't get the 3080. But this is like for like what the iMac would be. 32-inch display is made for second screens for iMac. Is the BenQ PD3220U. The reason why, it's got the wide color gamut, it's a 10-bit panel, it's a professional quality display. It matches what, the iMac has, except the iMac is 5K and the iMac is 500 nits versus 300 nits, but it's professional quality monitor. That's the most important thing. It's like for like, and these are great to use as a second monitor for your Mac. You can use them for PC and you can use them for MacBook Pros as well. Awesome monitor. So that's the monitor you have to do if you're comparing like for like. Obviously, the 10-core CPU, like for like. This motherboard, why am I going with a $700 motherboard? Well, that's the only motherboard I could find that had two Thunderbolt 3s, had 10 gig networking and custom storage controller, which the iMac has T2 chip custom storage controller. That one has some sort of RAID custom storage controller you can add into the PCI slot as well. So that's what you need, like for like. Of course, you can get cheaper PC if you want, but if you want like for like, you got to be fair, right? Why have I got a $500 case? Well, the iMac case is worth $500, probably even more. That precision machined aluminium enclosure there. So it is actually shocking. If you go like for like, the iMac is actually cheaper than a PC. And I'll go to another spec. Now this is another spec PC. This is literally what I have testing against this iMac, okay? And still, it's more expensive than the iMac. You might be thinking, well, it's got an RTX 3080 in the PC, even though it says 2080. I've just done the same price, $700. But it's going to be very close, the price between the two. Remember, you got to add around $300 to the Mac configuration to add the 64 gigs RAM. But the graphics card in the iMac actually costs more than the RTX 3080. Yeah, it does. So the closest graphics card I can get to the iMac is this workstation. This is a W5700, and this is the closest thing, but even this isn't as good as the graphics card that goes in the iMac. So this has 36 compute units, 8 gigabytes of RAM. It's really equivalent to a 5700, the 5700 XT that you get in the iMac. And remember, it's a Radeon Pro. If you boot into Windows, you get the blue professional drivers. It is a Pro workstation graphics card. It supports 10-bit because the iMac panel is 10-bit and Radeon Pro drivers. This graphics card is around $900 US. Now this has half the amount of RAM as the iMac graphics card, and it only has 36 compute units compared to 40 compute units. So I can imagine this would be a $1,200 to $1,500 graphics card, professional graphics card, if you could actually buy it, because it is an actual custom workstation card just for the iMac. So that surprised me that whichever way you do it, if you go like for like, or even in this configuration I have here that compares to it, it's still, the iMac is cheaper. Anyway, let's get into it. First, we have Cinebench here. As I said, I overclocked my CPU to match a 10900K. It's like a stock 10900K. It'll use around 220 watts through Cinebench. Now, the iMac only uses about 130 watts. It settles down at 130, can peak to about 160 max and settles down at around 130, 135 watts. So they're both 10 cores. They're nearly the same CPU. And you have a look there, it's like 600 points advantage to the PC. But as I said before, the PC's using 220 watts. The Mac, it has much better performance per watt. In actual fact, I undervolted the PC CPU and I tried to get the exact same frequency and the exact same Cinebench score as the iMac, and I actually had to undervolt it by minus 100 millivolts. So the iMac CPU is a specially bin part, and it would actually cost Apple more to buy this part. None of this really matters, I just thought that was interesting. But this CPU on the PC obviously is much faster, and I can get around 6600 if I overclock it. But we're leaving things stock here. One thing to note here is I do have 128 gigs in the iMac. It's running at 2666, where I'm using 64 gigs in the PC. That's running at 3000 megahertz. I decided to do the XMP profile, but it doesn't really matter for these scores because these benchmarks I do, once you hit 64 gigs, you're not really going to get any advantages there. So if you look at Luxmark, you can see there the 5700 XT on the iMac is well short of the 3080. Now the 3080 is the latest generation. You'd expect it to be faster, but I didn't expect it to be that much faster. It's actually weird how slow the actual 5700 XT is in Luxmark. Now I thought that was strange, so what I've done is I connected a Radeon 7 via eGPU to the iMac, and there you get a more competitive score, right? Now the 5700 Radeon 7, there's not that much difference in speed, but obviously HBM, it likes Luxmark or something, because 48,000 versus 72, it's more competitive there. Of course, the 3080 latest, it just smashes it here, but you'll be surprised in content creation. Okay, when it comes to content creation, on the left the PC, on the right the iMac, and as you can see there, a bit of a destroyation there as well. Export scores are faster, that's because you can use the NVENC encoder for exporting now. Playback is closer than I thought, 69 on the iMac versus 76. I will say, until the latest update of Adobe, which now you use GPU encoding for HEVC H.264, the iMac was still better for those codecs. If you went to Red or something like that, yeah, the PC was better. But for H.264 HEVC, the iMac was always better. But now with PCs, they use the GPU now, so that's where they're getting the killer scores now. And you can see there the GPU score is much higher than obviously the GPU score on the iMac. You got to remember the iMac will only do about a total of 150 watts sustained sort of GPU and CPU together. Yes, together. Can boost over 200 watts. The PC can do 220 watts on the CPU, even more if you overclock, like 300 watts if you overclock, and about 350 watts on the GPU. So we're talking 600 watts versus 150 watts. So just bear that in mind. So now if we have a look at this benchmark, After Effects, and this blew me away. Like, it really surprised me. As I said before, 600 watts versus 150 watts sustained. The PC on the left is faster. Yes, 1119 versus 1007. But I thought it would blow it away, right? The latest graphics card and After Effects does like CUDA. Now 64 versus 128 gigs, that will help out slightly. Once you hit 64 gigs on these benchmarks, there's not that much difference. But as you can see, that tracking score, very similar between the two. And of course the GPU on the PC is just killing it there, 124 versus 88. But if we're looking at the overall score for total system, how it performs in After Effects, you get so much performance out of that iMac, considering how much less power it uses. Now let's look at Photoshop, and can you believe it? The iMac beats the PC. And the GPU score, I guess it's that 16 gigs of memory really helps out there on the GPU. You can see it beats it. Even for general score, I would not have thought this would ever be the case, considering, this is the latest GPU you can get and how much more juice you can pump into the CPU of the, PC. And yeah, you can see here for Photoshop, WOOF. the iMac comes out on top there. So my conclusion from this is the iMac is really great value. If you go like for like, it ends up being cheaper than a PC. Of course, when it comes to gaming, forget about it. The iMac can game, don't worry about that. But really, 3080 is just going to destroy anything for gaming, apart from a 3090, of course. But if you want a workstation and a computer for general use, and you're thinking of going like for like, I think the iMac is definitely worth considering. It's a nice, neat package. It gets the most out of its parts. And of course, you can use Final Cut and stuff like that as well. Now, the PC, of course, you can spec it for cheaper if you really want to, but that's not like for like. It's got to be said there that if you go like for like, the iMac will be cheaper. But you don't have to use that display. You don't have to use that motherboard, expensive motherboard, etc., etc. And then you could have a cheaper system and outperform the iMac. Yes, true. But if you want a professional 10-bit panel, you want professional graphics card, you want to use the professional apps, I got to say I did not expect it to be this close. I really expected the PC to just blow away the iMac. And yeah, in some cases it does, but it was much closer than I thought it would be. And I am going to do this shootout again with this special graphics card I can't tell you about. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Catch you in the next one. Tally ho.